says. Thank you very much. Please be seated. I will remind you again, some of you have come later, make sure your phones are either off or on silent. Make sure that, in fact, I don't think you need to stand up when you're speaking. It's very respectful, but it's clearer if you speak directly into the microphones, except if you're the sheriff, he doesn't need a microphone. It is being filmed and webcast at the back there. You may leave during the meeting and come back, but if you're going to leave permanently, please tell Alice, the clerk sitting here. And I hope you can agree. Any objections to intending to have a break, ideally at 6:30, to come back at 7 o'clock? So I hope that's acceptable. Any apologies?
We've got apologies from Councillor Humberstone, Councillor Landell-Mills and Councillor Ross Smith.
Thank you very much. Any additional apologies? Yes, please.
Councillor Hall, Councillor Diggins, Councillor Nala Hartley.
Thank you. Do you have them down? Yes, and sorry, Councillor Fowler.
Councillor Gunt will be late.
Any declarations of interest from the members? I don't see any hands, so thank you very much. Let's proceed first then to item 3, which is the minutes of our meeting on the 28th of last year. Any questions, comments? I'm going to propose that we approve those minutes. I'll need a seconder. Do I have one? I see the leader, thank you. Any comments, questions, or may we proceed to vote? Those in favour? Thank you, it's carried clearly. Thank you very much. Any appointments to committees to be noted? Leader?
I don't believe so, unless anyone corrects me.
Okay, it seems that we...
Yeah, that's later.
No.
I beg your pardon. Yes, sorry. Councillor Imogen Thomas to Audit and Governance.
In the place of Councillor Railton, yes? Who's now a cabinet member.
Correct. Sorry.
Thank you.
And I'll be coming on to that one later.
Much. Okay, coming then to item 5, which is announcements. I mean, as Lord Mayor, you do get many engagements. I had to cycle out to the Ring Road today, and I was trying to think how many engagements I've had and how many I would need to catch up with Susanna when she was Lord Mayor. I think she has the record. I worked out I have to average at least 5 a day to try to reach her number, so I don't think I'm quite aspiring to that, but it is very touching. But the other thing I was going to say, first of all, I do want to thank and congratulate, actually Sharon is one of the people I should thank, the town hall staff, the civic office. Those of you who were able to go to the Holocaust Memorial Service will have been very impressed. I thought it was a wonderfully appropriate, moving service. Sharon did a wonderful job. I would exhort you all, if you can, to look at the video, which she cut back, I think, from 1 hour to 5 minutes by one of the children of a survivor who's still alive, who then, at the end of the service, we had a video filmed by him, which is almost an hour. But if you want the abbreviated version, it was very moving, and I thought showed the council and town hall off to its best. So please look at that. The other thing I was going to say, I shouldn't maybe say this because it might deter people, but you don't realize how much time it can take being Lord Mayor. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of being invited to 2 probably rival Chinese New Year celebrations. And I realized I spent 8 hours at these two events. One was a wonderful event here for the city Chinese community, and then the university students took over the new theatre. And it was very satisfying, but God, it was very long. One does get invited to these things, and people are so pleased when someone can come in this role. I was then going to invite Deputy Lord Mayor. Do you have anything to say? Sorry, Sheriff?
Nothing from me, Lord Mayor.
City Rector?
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Good evening, everybody. Lovely to see you. On this day in 1948, the world was shocked to hear that Mahatma Gandhi had been assassinated. On this day in 1649, Britain and Europe were shocked that King Charles I had been executed this morning. It is a day of sober anniversaries, and indeed Friday's Holocaust Memorial event was indeed very poignant and special. Thinking about Gandhi and thinking about Charles I and the Civil War, it did make me think that what we are a small part of tonight, but a really important part, is just that worldwide and historic search for governance that works, that is fair, and lots of reflections about violence, non-violence, legitimate authority. And both Gandhi and also the Civil War brought those issues very much to the fore. So, as ever, my friends, it is a privilege to be with you tonight. Hope it goes really well. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Thank you very much, Anthony. Leader, do you have some announcements?
Lord Mayor, I do. So some announcements and thanks. Members of Council will probably be aware that Councillor Nadine Bielli-Summers has resigned from the Council. Unfortunately, she's very busy with her work in the health service at the moment, which I'm sure we all understand, considering the pressures that the health service is under. And doesn't feel able to continue. So I would like to thank her on behalf of Council and on behalf of the people of Holywell and also the people of Littlemore for her service to this Council and this city, and to thank her in particular for her work chairing the housing panel, which I know that a number of people will have really welcomed and been part of. So that is one announcement. The second announcement is also a thank you and an announcement to thank Councillor Imogen Thomas for her very good service as a cabinet member for climate change and climate justice, and to say how sorry we are that she's had to stand down on health grounds, but to also announce that we are very delighted that Councillor Anna Railton is going to take on that position. So that's my announcements to Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Before turning to Tom beside me as the acting, I guess you're the acting chief executive for tonight, I know that Councillor Malik did ask me, and he said he was going to keep it very brief, 20 seconds, to update us on what has been achieved, as he's reported earlier, on the fundraising for the Pakistan flood relief.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll be very brief. And generosity of the people of Oxford and Oxfordshire never surprises me. So I managed to collect £20,000, which was put into 1,200 plus 3 fully medical kitted camp where we treated over 1,200 patients. And we built 22 houses, 16 by 18 for 22 families. And basically we provided 150 families also food ration. So thank you very much to the people who donated.
Acting Chief Executive.
Nothing from the Chief Executive. Thank you.
Chief Finance Officer. We'll wait for the budget meeting, I think. Monitoring Officer. Nothing. So we're now speeding through up to item 6, public addresses, questions on matters for decision. I gather there are none. I believe that's correct. So let's proceed then straight away to item 7. And I'm going to invite Councillor Aziz to introduce the Thriving Communities strategy. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Upton, Louise, thank you. Councillor Aziz.
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. So you can see the Thriving Communities strategy. I'm sure everyone's read it. The purpose of the Thriving Communities strategy is to put greater emphasis on how the council can work for and alongside communities and how we can better ensure people's voices are centred in all our work and our approach to tackling inequalities in the city, which sadly are deepening. We know that we are still facing the consequences of the COVID pandemic, and we are currently in a cost of living crisis. So we also acknowledge that for many people and communities, they are struggling right now to survive, let alone thrive. The strategy that's been developed has been developed alongside members of Oxford's diverse communities. Number of workshops have been held across the city over the past months. We've had a really good turnout in terms of people attending, and we've heard some very important points that they've raised about how they would like the council to better engage with them. We're pleased with the fact that a cross-section of residents have come forward to hold these discussions, and it's been very important that we've gone into communities to hold these discussions rather than expecting people to come to us. The community engagement side of things is something that this strategy really focuses on in terms of trying to improve the way that we listen to people, and to also try and work better with members of communities and try and also identify resources for them, because we know that the volunteers across our city and the community organisations have been doing incredible work for many decades, but over the last few years of the COVID pandemic, their work has really come into their own. So this is really what this strategy is about. It's about shifting the tone and way that we choose, that we want to now engage with communities. You know, I encourage everyone to support this strategy. And obviously, my two fellow councillors who are named on this paper, if you want to add anything, please do.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask, Louise, do you want to speak now or reserve the right to speak as seconder? Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from Catherine, Councillor Miles?
Yeah, no questions, but we do want to just say a couple of remarks, if that's okay. As we were reminded earlier on, just before this session, about COVID and the importance of community, and we're reminded also in the paper itself about the fact that we are one of the second most unequal city in the country, with poverty literally on our doorstep and with the cost of living crisis plunging people further into poverty and potentially increasing the inequality that already exists. Now, I represent one of the wealthiest parts of the city, but I can assure you that the residents in Summertown and care for and are concerned by this inequality and really recognise a need for the city to work towards the words that I think I take from Councillor Aziz: social justice, racial justice, gender justice and climate justice. We really support that. So we're one city, and we can only thrive when we all thrive, and so we support the goals to improve the inclusivity of the city and the sustainability of the community facilities from an energy efficiency perspective. And we support the 4 Ps of the strategy, from the Community Impact Fund, looking at the people side, on the place side, the healthy place shaping and becoming a leader in active travel, and on Pride, supporting the development of the city Sanctuary of Action Plan. City of Sanctuary Action Plan. So really just it remains for me to say that we will warmly welcome the Council's approach to this strategy, thank the Council officers for their time in taking the participatory approach to develop it, and also look forward to working on the implementation of it together. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I've seen Councillor Pegg, Councillor, Hosny, and I thought there was one there. Are there any others who want to speak so I can note it now? Okay, Lucy.
Yeah, I just want to thank Shazda for this. It's a great strategy with some really promising words in there. I was lucky enough to be a member of the Child Poverty Review Group last year. And so I just wondered how the recommendations of that group would be integrated into this strategy, especially the recommendation that the Council implements a socio-economic duty.
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Councillor Pegg. These questions have also been raised by Councillor Jaffrey Mabini as well. We have provided a written response. I've also spoken to officers just before this meeting. So in order to provide you with a more detailed response, I will need to go back and speak to officers and get back to you. So I'll make sure that happens.
Thank you. Hosnia.
Thank you, Shaista and team. There's clearly a lot that's really great in this, and especially on the participatory front. I fully read some of the contributions, and it's certainly a blueprint of other work that will be done, for example, in the City of Sanctuary work. So thank you for all of that. But, almost 1 in 3 children are still living in poverty in Oxford, and this will be an issue that I know is very close to everyone's heart. And we have had 2 pieces of recent a motion that was passed in October, and also the recommendations from the Child Poverty Review Group. And Naomi Eisenstadt, who actually started the Sure Start Children's Centres, was one of the people that gave evidence to the review group. And she said that she was obviously, there were things in her working life that she was very proud of, the fact that she brought child poverty to the fore at the time when it wasn't really at the forefront of everyone's minds. But she did think that changes need to be such that they cannot be washed away by terrible Tory governments. And I think that something like the socio-economic duty is so important because it actually does embed changes that are more difficult to erase. And that's why it was in the motion that we all approved unanimously. So it would be great to make sure that, and I remember that it was some words were to the effect of the heads of, the appropriate heads of corporate strategy will bring a strategy, options to us, and also to around the child poverty strategy itself. So yes, it's really important to the democratic functioning of the council. I think that this is embedded into this work rather than it being parallel or forgotten about. So yes, it would be good to hear some more detail of how that's going to be done. I was hoping it would be in the paper itself, but failing that, it would be nice to see how it's going to be embedded and continued, rather than the work that we've done kind of being, in a parallel somewhere, functioning in a parallel state. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, Shaista, you've actually officially, in terms of the rules, you've had your right, you've already responded, but I will invite, since Louise still has her right to a seconder to respond, do you want to say anything extra?
Not really, other than that I know Shaista will work to get a response to that, and I will help her as much as I can, and along with Chewe, who's also part of the Cabinet responsibility for this paper.
We've got a proposer and a seconder. May I put it to the vote, please? Those in favour? Those against? It's unanimous. Well, those abstaining, I should ask, but it's clearly carried overwhelmingly. Thank you very much. Now we can proceed to the item 8, which is to be introduced by Nigel Chapman, the flexible hybrid working policy. Do I have a seconder? The leader, thank you. Nigel, would you like to introduce it, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I was reflecting when I was hearing all the good things about the freedom we'd given out to Ms. O'Grady, that a few years ago, the hybrid working policy would not be a term that most people would have understood. It shows how much things have changed over the past 3 years. And it's necessary to put this to you because we need to replace the old policy, the home working policy. Most staff now do work in a hybrid way. Very few actually work exclusively at the town hall or in Oxford 5 days a week. They work in a hybrid way. Some of them work in the county's offices, and they work from home for the rest of the time. So this policy covers most people in a way that a few years ago it only covered a very small number of people. It's important on a number of levels. First of all, it's important because it actually tabulates clearly some of the health and safety issues that we need to confront in relation to hybrid working. It's in line with best practice. It has been widely consulted on with the unions. I think it's really, really important with staff policies of this kind that we get support of all the main unions who work for the City Council, and they're very happy with it. And finally, I would say this, that actually hybrid working is actually bringing a number of benefits. It's bringing flexibility. It's allowing us to attract people to work for the City Council who would maybe think about it before because they don't have to work 5 days a week in Oxford, which is one of the most expensive cities in the country, and they have to travel less, which must be a good thing, actually, in terms of the carbon footprint and the stress and strain upon them. So for all those reasons, I commend this policy to you. I hope you'll give it your unanimous support. Thank you.
Thank you. Nice and brief. Susan, do you want to speak now or reserve your right to
I'll
speak?
reserve my right in case I feel the need.
Thank you very much. Does anybody want to ask questions, speak on this topic? I don't see any hands. We're proceeding nice and quickly. So, Susan, do you want to speak now?
No, I just commend the report. I think it's an excellent report. Thank you, Lord Mayor.
Nigel, do you want to sum up?
My early intervention was a summing up, actually, to be honest with you, so I don't really have any more to say, except to say that Scrutiny also have evaluated and reviewed both this policy and the policy that's going to come up next, and are supportive of them.
Thank you. It obviously was a well-written report, since there are no questions. If we got a proposer and second, can I see all those in favour? Against? None. Thank you again. That was nice and quick. Then again, you, Nigel, on disciplinary policy. Do we have a seconder? Again, Susan, the leader. Thank you very much. Please introduce it.
Yeah, again, I mean, the old policy had been in place for 10 years. It was obviously time to review it. Obviously, you know, with disciplinary issues, you hope that for the vast, vast majority of staff, they never go anywhere near the disciplinary policy. It never has to be applied to them. They're all good, hard-working people for whom it would never be appropriate. But unfortunately, occasionally, people do things in the course of their employment that aren't of the best, and we need to have a disciplinary policy in place to deal with them. So it's time to renew it. The previous policy was quite complicated, and it had a load of sort of addenda in procedural terms that have been accreting over time, over this last 10 years. So we've now managed to simplify it to one procedural policy and one policy document. It's in line with best ACAS practice, which I think is important. It complies with the law of the land. It simplifies certain things. The previous policy was quite complicated in the area of investigation, and it's made it simpler, and therefore faster, and hopefully better to use. And I suppose the area where we had most debate was on the role of councillors. Now, councillors play a very little role in this matter, but one area they do play a role in is to observe appeals against dismissal. And we had quite a conversation with officers and on the political side about that. I've always been in favour, frankly, of when people get to that very serious stage where they're at risk of losing their job, because that's what an appeal against dismissal is, that there is a fresh pair of eyes of an independent nature cast upon the proceedings and the way they're being conducted. It's absolutely vital that all disciplinary proceedings are conducted in a fair and impartial way, but never more so than when a member of staff is facing losing their job. So the existing provision has been maintained. I would be the first person to be asked, because it would be my portfolio, to sit on such a review, and then after me would be other cabinet members. And given there are 10 of them, that should be more than enough, given that we don't have very many of these every year, I'm glad to say. So I think it's a good policy, it's clear. It has, again, the unanimous support of the trade unions, both Unite and Unison. It's been reviewed by Scrutiny, and once again, I commend it to you.
Thank you very much. Susan, do you wish to say anything? Reserve the right. Are there any questions from the members? Again, a perfect record. Thanks very much. Do you want then to sum up, Nigel? I note that we are meant to agree the procedure and guidance with immediate effect, authorise the head of business improvement, and then it has, you can see, 2 clauses about disciplinary procedure, but to implement what you described. So may I take it then that we proceed to the vote? We have a proposer and seconder. Those in favour? Against? Again, unanimous. Clean sweep. Thank you very much. Now we're coming to exciting item 10, Council and Committee Meetings Programme for the next 3 years. So I invite Susan to introduce it, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I'd like to start by thanking the Head of Law and Governance and all officers who've been involved in this thankless task of trying to pull together a meetings timetable, because it is really hard to try and get them all aligned and also as far as possible, not coinciding with school holidays and with religious festivals and the like. On that particular note, we have been having some discussion about next year's budgetary council meeting, which, like this year, does appear to fall within school half-term holidays, which I know is difficult for members who either have small children or who are teachers or partners of teachers, and indeed for officers for all the same reasons. So I'm proposing this report, but with a recommendation to Council that we do look again at that meeting with a view to potentially using the reserve meeting, which is the meeting that we put in case we need it, which for next year, and if you want the exact page reference, the page is 180, and so Budget Council next year was due to be on the 15th of February, but there is the reserve meeting on Monday the 26th of February, so I think we would be looking to see if we could use that meeting instead. But we would still need a reserve meeting, so that's the thing that we will have to have another look at. The other thing that I should say in putting this to Council is that that would involve separating out the HRA budget process from the rest of the budget process, the revenue budget. So the idea would be that we would take the HRA budget process at the January Council meeting, but take the revenue budget at the February budget meeting. So with that, I commend this report to you. We may therefore be coming back with some slight amendment at a future council meeting.
So could I just check, are you in effect, in terms of what the recommendation is in the papers, it says delegate authority to the head of law and governance to make changes, but it mentions specifically about committee structure or committee remits. You are trying to make it slightly more flexible than that, to make changes to dates in consultation with group and so on.
Lord Mayor, if the head of law and governance would allow, I would like us to be able to add an additional delegation which delegates authority to the head of law and governance in consultation with group leaders to make a changed date for that.
May I ask if that sounds acceptable, so thank you very much. I cannot remember now if I asked for a seconder who it is. There it is. It's the you are seconding, are you? Lovely. Okay, I'll let Chris second. Do you want to speak as seconder?
I have nothing to add, either now or later.
Thank you very much. Anybody want to comment? It sounds as if some of the potential pitfalls have been anticipated. Anybody want to speak? Otherwise, do you want to say any more, Susan?
I feel I've already said too much.
Okay. If not, then let's proceed to the vote. Those of you in favour, with the one change that we've agreed that we delegate to Head of Law and Governance to consult with groups and make changes as appropriate. And are you voting against? So it's carried. Thank you. Thanks very much. And now we go to the questions on cabinet minutes. So there is a time limit of 15 minutes on this item. I notice you, Chris, you want to ask questions, but there's a limit of 3 minutes. Please proceed.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I have 3 questions to pose. To Councillor Upton, we'll all be familiar with that the Levelling Up Bill didn't deliver the funding we were hoping for relating to the Cowley Branch Line. So to ask her to please update Council as to what the impact of that is and what that changes about the forward plan for that project. And to ask Councillor Turner 2 questions. Firstly, the minutes describe St Aldate's Chamber as hoping to be occupied in December 22, and to update Council as to what progress there's been on that front. and to ask if he could elaborate regarding the £1.25 million negative variance regarding ODS and general and minor works that I've already emailed him in advance of the meeting. Thank you.
I'll first then invite Louise to respond.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So obviously it is very disappointing that we didn't get the Levelling Up Fund money, because that would have freed up the money we are going to put into this for other things, including actually towards delivering it. But I can reassure you that we had already got in place a package to cover the whole cost of funding the full business case. And that's been thanks to enormous efforts actually of Tom Bridgman and his team there to get contributions from local, the sort of employment land owners around there. So along with a substantial commitment from us as the City Council, we have got the full amount we need to press ahead with the full business case. And just to clarify, that funding will also include some for doing the connectivity studies to make sure that the sort of Littlemore and Leeds areas, the residents will have proper access into stations alongside the employment areas. But yeah, I can't stress enough how important it is to have that full business case so that we will have, an oven-ready scheme, as somebody's unfortunate phrase, but it will put us into a very good position for bidding for government funds and getting contributions from...
Thank you. I could see Tom Bridgman put his hand up. I think he can clarify some points.
It was just one point to say that, yeah, we do have that package in place, but that's still subject to contract. So as the Cabinet report said, that we're still finalising what is effectively a contract with Network Rail and a collaboration agreement with the landowners. So everything Louise said is accurate, but still subject to contract, which we hope to get over the line in the coming weeks.
Thank you. I was going to ask, yes, Nigel, if he could answer. Can you answer on both those remaining two questions? Thanks very much.
Yes, Lord Mayor, because both effectively fall within my portfolio. So on the move from SAC to the Town Hall, we're in the final stages of negotiation on that. We're very, very close to concluding those negotiations with the tenant. We're not being penalised by the delay because there is a rent-free period that we've had to grant the tenant, and every month that we're late with it, that rent-free period becomes less. So there is no particular issue financially with this. Obviously, we'd like to get it completed and finished, but I can assure you on the financial grounds, there's no penalty for us in this matter. On the second question, which is more
complicated... the negative, yes, the negative, yeah.
On the second question, which is a rather more complicated one, I mean, those are provisional figures. We're not yet at year end. So we need to see where we are then. I think they will move around a bit, and hopefully the deficit will be less great by March 31st. It's driven by a number of factors, to be frank with you. There's the scale of the work and its scope. There's a big backlog of work that needs to be done, which was built up under the lockdown period. And I'm sure you would welcome that, because we don't want our tenants to be, years and years of disadvantage and not have the right things done in relation to their houses and flats. There's quite a lot of extra spend on fencing, which is also driving this, because we've had a lot of storms in Oxford, unfortunately, and fencing is particularly expensive to replace. And generally, actually, there is a cost of inflation in building materials, which I'm sure everybody is very aware of at the moment. So that's driving all this cost uplift. What I can also assure you, Councillor Smoten, is that obviously we're going to have to set a more realistic budget next year, given the scale of the undertakings that we need to carry on doing for people. But as I say, I'm sure whilst nobody likes to get the finances not precise, in the end, this is being spent on good things of value to our council tenants, and they need this, and we need to get this backlog shifted. So that's the basis on which this overspend is happening.
Any other members want to ask a question about the minutes Cabinet meeting? I cannot see any hands, in which case, thank you very much. And let's proceed then. There's quite a lengthy list of questions on notice from members. For the ones to Ed Turner, is there someone poised to answer if necessary? We'll see. Okay, let's start with questions to the leader. First from you, Catherine. Any supplementary?
Yeah, Yes, please. So just on the market policy for the council, would the council be open to developing a standalone market policy for the city to cover the indoor and outdoor markets that are exempt from the street trading policy, please? Thank you.
I mean, I think that might be a little de trop because we've already got other mechanisms to control those markets. So with the covered market, obviously it's part of our leasing strategy, and we've obviously got a whole approach to the covered market, which does include sustainability, which I know is your particular interest in this topic. And equally, I mean, I think when we procure the Gloucester Green market, that has been part of our strategy in terms of that procurement, insofar as we can influence it. So I'm not sure that I see a scope for creating yet another strategy. It doesn't feel to me that that would add to our ability to actually control these things. I think we have got mechanisms that we already use and can use and are using.
Thank you. Your next question is on sky lanterns. Do you have a Thank you. Is anyone able, I don't know whether Ros had intended to have a supplementary, but there are two questions then from Ros Smith to...
Lord Mayor, she can't, if she's not here, no.
Oh, she can't, okay. So then we proceed, Chris Jarvis, you had one on Councillor App and digital engagement. Supplementary?
Supplementary.
Then Councillor Morrisell, you had supplementary on the Oxford United ground. Thank you very much. Then we had a question to the Deputy Leader, who's not yet here, on the budget and ODS commercial model. First, I should ask, do you have a supplementary?
Sorry, that was me. I missed the... Could you say the title of the question again, please?
Your question about budget ODS commercial model.
Right, yes, okay. No supplementary on that one, but I do have one on the next one, which is about turnover saving. The question is, considering that no corresponding turnover saving item appeared in the previous year's budget, isn't it true that a manager who was able to ensure an overlap and an in-person handover would now be exceeding their budget, whereas previously this would have been the default situation and any unwanted break in between post holders would have constituted an unexpected windfall saving?
Is anyone volunteering to respond to that, or shall we give a written response later?
I'm sorry, yeah.
Okay, you'll get a written response from Ed Turner later. Then we cannot take the next one on Trapground Bridge repairs. So then we move to questions to Councillor Shaista Aziz. Ros, do you have a supplementary, your question on transport for asylum seekers? Do you have a supplementary? Do you have a no? Lucy, no supplementary. Okay, thank you. Then for Deco Walcott, Lois, do you have a supplementary? Thank you. Then we have several from Saj Malik. All for Linda. Do you want to have supplementary on the first one, on selective licensing? They're all on selective licensing.
Lord Mayor, you be happy. I got no additional any of them, so you can move ahead.
Oh, we're speeding ahead. And then from Al Norris to Linda Smith on insulation of rented properties. Supplementary?
Yes, please, Lord Mayor. Just a follow-up from the response. I was just wondering, surely, while I think we all accept and agree that Fabric First is the best approach, it's very expensive and will take a long time to roll out. So surely, in the meantime, if roofs of properties are generally sound, why can't we just go ahead and fit solar panels to the roofs? There's a much easier and quicker and simpler intermediary action. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to answer this. I'm going to answer this as a supplementary from question LS6. I think we've skipped over LS5. Is that correct? Shall I go ahead? Yeah, so thank you very much for that suggestion. I mean, at the moment we are focused on getting 95% of our council homes up to the EC rating of C or above, and we are influenced as well by the government funding that's available and making full use of that to complement our own investment. Going forward, we know that solar panels, they will be very important in terms of getting to net zero carbon by 2040, and we will be looking at every opportunity, and looking at every single funding stream that's available to utilise solar to get us towards that goal. And I look forward to working with both our new Cabinet Member for Climate Justice and yourself on looking for those opportunities and exploiting them. Councillor Morris, thank you.
Thank you. I got so excited because Sarge had no follow-ups, supplementaries, and Miles and Malik both begin with M and have 5 letters, so I just scooted. Catherine, do you have a supplementary?
Yeah, it's just really, thank you. To clarify just what enforcement actions are taken, or how do you actually check that there is adherence to the EPC rating of E or above of the HMOs, because there's just concerns that many of them may not actually be at level E. And this was to Councillor Smith.
Did you catch the follow-up question? Supplementary?
Yes, I mean, that's the point of the licensing scheme, is that those certificates have to be provided as part of the granting of the licence. And those certificates, are produced by professionals who are registered to do their job, so we leave it to them.
Thank you. Rosie, you have 2 questions on SWEP provision. Do you have supplementaries on either? No. Thank you very much. Then on planning and housing delivery to Alex Hollingsworth. Catherine, paving over front garden.
Yeah, so this is an issue in my ward. Basically what it is that cars are overhanging onto the pavement because people have paved over their front gardens. Well, I understand this is permitted development and therefore allowed. You mentioned that there can be conditions that are attached to this permitted development, and sometimes there are breaches in that. So can you just give an example of what kind of conditions can be attached, or the kinds of breaches that allow the council to actually take action?
It's about permeability, not size, unfortunately. The requirement in the permitted development regulations is that if you do choose to pave over your front garden, you need to do it in a permeable way, and it'll be over breaches to the permeability, not to the size. The issue that you highlight, absolutely recognise what a pestilential pain it is. Certainly, my daughter's view, strongly expressed, if your car doesn't fit on the street, you shouldn't have the car, seems to me to be also applicable. If you can't fit it into the parking space, then you need a smaller vehicle. I do encourage all councillors to encourage the planning enforcement team, the parking enforcement teams, to look at whether they can issue tickets. But I appreciate that they find it very difficult, apparently, to issue tickets for cars parked across pavements, which is deeply regrettable.
Thank you. Then Stephen Goddard, you have a question also to Alex on nesting site.
Yeah, thanks, Lord Mayor. Just a quick follow-up to which the council may or may not have a ready-made answer. Does the council have views specifically on the use of so-called swift bricks in new build, which, as the name suggests, are very easily installable because they are, in effect, a constituent part of any given property. Any property can be made out of bricks, and you can put 2 or 3 in which are specifically swift bricks.
Can I just check? Did you say council or councillor?
Councillor.
So okay, right. So I can have an opinion. I don't have to go and check what the council's. I just accrue power and speak for the entire council. No, my personal view is that what we're talking about here is tools to implement a policy, and all tools ought to be open. And things like bat boxes and swift bricks are important. I think there are also other things which are equally important. I think having spent a lot of time over this weekend exchanging emails with my fellow allotmenteers about planting native hedges, and things like that, those also make a significant contribution. So I think as we move forward, the fullest array of things we can do to maximise biodiversity are important, and Swift bricks would be something that would get my personal support.
Thank you. Sounds very good. Councillor Chris Merton on Greenfield site review.
I quite like being Councillor Chris. Thank you. My follow-up is, so this is regarding this site 112B. Why is it that our Greenbelt reviews regarding that site indicate that preventing settlement agglomeration is an overriding concern there, when Marston and Summertown are absolutely prevented from merging due to the existence of the Cherwell floodplain, and in particular, when being unable to house more of our own in that way means that we experience settlement agglomeration on Oxford's fringes, most notably at Kidlington?
Well, first of all, the assessments are technical assessments, and they're done in an objective manner. So, unlike the previous question, I'm not expressing a view, and I do not express views, and I have never expressed views on which sites should and should not be subject to particular assessments within a technical document like the HELAR. The important thing here is that the processes that we followed in the last round of local plans in terms of assessing sites put forward for development against the tests of the Greenbelt were identical inside Oxford and outside Oxford, and that seems to me the principle that's the most important thing. It would be entirely inappropriate, I think, to apply one test inside Oxford and then ask the councils around us to apply a different test. And that is not what happened. We applied an entirely identical test, which is why some greenfield sites, some Greenbelt sites in Oxford were, as a part of that local plan, deallocated from the Greenbelt and allocated for housing, something which I am very comfortable with and fully in support of, because it's exactly the same process that Cherwell District Council did, that South Oxfordshire District Council did, Vale of Whitehorse and West Oxfordshire, and I think that is an important principle to maintain.
Thank you very much. Now we have various questions for Nigel Chapman. Lawrence Foulweather on the Aryan QL system. Do you have a supplementary?
I noticed that the report presented to Audit and Governance is exempt from wider publication. Could we have an assurance that this report will eventually be published to the Council?
I would like to take advice on that. I think at the moment, definitely we can't publish it because there's a lot of confidential conversations going on about in discussion with the contractors. My instinct is that we should be in a position to do that, yes. That's where I would like to get to, but I'd like to take some specialist advice from Susan Sale, Head of Legal, before I do that.
Thank you. Councillor Jarvis, Chris Jarvis to Nigel. Benefit threshold supplementary? No. We now have 5 questions about glyphosate, which I believe tend to have very similar responses. Are there any, maybe we could combine a supplementary if there are any. Any supplementaries? Do you have one, Lucy? You have one.
I'm pretty sure that me and Lois have one supplementary for every one of our questions. So we'd like to do all of our supplementaries, and Lois goes first, I think.
Come on, you're allowed them, but they seem very similar, at least in the response.
Lois hasn't got one, but I have 3. So my first one for NC4 is, so I understand that you might not have these details to hand, but could you tell us the locations where glyphosate was used on these occasions in 2020, 2021 and 2022? And an answer via email is perfectly fine.
Well, I don't have them to hand, and I must slightly question the value of that level of detail. I mean, this is used in small ways across many parts of the city to target certain sorts of weeds on hard surfaces, tennis courts, gullies and other such places. I mean, the list is going to be enormous, and I must question, frankly, the value of the public knowledge and the cost of getting all that information. You can ask for it, but I do rather challenge the value of it.
So on the next one, could you provide details of the extensive research that ODS has carried out into alternatives and about what alternatives it has dismissed as unviable? Other cities that seem quite similar to Oxford, like Brighton, towns like Glastonbury, Hammersmith and Fulham, they've all made alternatives work, so it would be interesting to know why we can't do that here.
Well, as I understand it, they've made alternatives work because they are very, very labour intensive. They're not necessarily chemically driven, and they require people to go around and literally tackle weeds on a weed-by-weed, place-by-place basis, which is frankly far more expensive than a weed killer-based solution, whatever ingredients you have in it. So, again, I slightly have to challenge the premise of your question and the value of spending a lot of time doing that level of research. And what I can assure you is that they are looking all the time for alternatives. I mean, we want to find alternatives, but the truth is the alternatives don't exist at the moment. They're not cost effective, they're not efficient, and if we were to go to alternatives, which would be very labour intensive, there would then be significant budgetary implications for that, and we'd have to come back to the council and argue for that against all the other priorities that we'd be facing in terms of budget pressures.
And just the final one, given the written answer, would I be correct in concluding that for the council, keeping paths and tennis courts clear is a more important objective than tackling the biodiversity crisis?
Again, I think that is a false dichotomy. We believe in doing both. I don't believe actually that the limited use of weed killers is having a massive impact on biodiversity. I mean, if you have evidence of that, I'd be very pleased to see it, but I'd be very, very surprised if that was the truth.
Thank you. So, Lewis, you were the first in the list on glyphosate. Did you have no supplementary? And Stephen Goddard, no supplementary. Thank you. And then Rosie Rawle on council tax collection, supplementary? No, thanks very much. And then first question to Anna as a cabinet member from Saj Malik on Holloway pollution. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, very brief, Lord Mayor. I mean, the answer is very well, but it doesn't answer my question. So when it happened last time, what measure have the council has taken since this report was issued? That was the question.
Well, I think the answer to the question was that there was actually no legal breach of NO2 on Holloway. So, so a legal breach actually requires sort of two things. So because it varies seasonally, you have to take an average over the whole year. Though there is also a sort of there's an hourly limit of 200, which I don't believe it breached.
Thank you. And then it's you again, Sarge, but this time to Louise. First one, traffic filters, pollution monitoring stations, any supplementary?
No, that one, no.
Support for traffic filters, supplementary?
Yes. My follow-up question there is, I think it is obviously, I hope she can answer something rather than saying it's a county issue. But in your point of view, you think these traffic filter obviously bringing in, wouldn't that have an impact on the local businesses, either the city centre, which they are to produce in south and the north of the city, and equally, obviously, I don't want on a Holloway, but is you cracking on with this? So that was the idea that put the question into it, because does these bus filter will have an effect on the local businesses?
Louise?
Thanks. That's a bit of a digression from your original question, Sarge. But business vehicles will be able to go through the filters. So this is going to make it much easier for many businesses to get around the city. So if you're a window cleaner, if you're a taxi driver, you're going to be able to get around the city without sitting in a traffic jam. So I think it's going to be good for business. I guess you're talking about businesses who think their customers are coming by car. Well, I'm afraid, we can't have everybody coming by car anymore. You asked about air quality in the last question. It's terrible for air quality for people to be arriving by car. So I think with the permit system that is in place to go with this proposal, so that people who really cannot find any other way to travel can come by car, but for everyone else, it's the nudge to get them onto public transport, onto a bike, or to walk. And there's lots of evidence that if you're walking or cycling past a business, you're much more likely to drop in than if you're driving past it in a car.
Thank you. And then, Sarge, you have two questions on LTNs, first on Cowley, then on East Oxford. Do you have supplementary on either? No. Thanks very much. Councillor Fairweather on Seacourt Park and Ride, flooding. Supplementary? Thank you. And then we have from Chris Merton, ZEZ timescale supplementary.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. You write in your answer that you would not expect the zero emission zone to have a significant congestion impact, but regardless of the stated purpose of the zone, it amounts to a £4 daily charge at least for the vast majority of private cars, and by vast majority I mean 95% plus. In other words, in all but name, it is a congestion zone. When London initially charged £5 a day for most private vehicles, they observed around a 30% fall in relevant traffic. Why is it that you wouldn't expect Oxford to experience a similar benefit?
Well, I think because the zero emission zone was always presumed to be coming in after or alongside the traffic filters. So it's never going to be expected to be producing that change. We would expect that change to be produced by the traffic filters. So I don't think the situation is going to arise where we would need to think about that too heavily. I hope that's an answer you'll accept.
Yeah, then your next question is on income contingent charging. Would you like to have a supplementary?
I will, yes. So the ZEZ presents a financial incentive, and in general, shouldn't a financial incentive be pitched relative to a person's means, not relative to an absolute number? The ZEZ charge, the highest charge, is currently £10, which for some people means little and for other is a day's budget or more. So why would we ask them to pay the same?
It's difficult, isn't it, with the ZEZ? I mean, we know that air quality, but poor air quality is contributes towards the death of 1 in 17 of our residents. So we really have to do something serious about improving our air quality. We're asking everybody who can to not drive a polluting car into the city. We're trying with the traffic filters to make public transport as viable as possible, and we hope. We're also trying to do measures to make walking and cycling more pleasant. So of course it's difficult asking people to pay money for things, and we know for anything it's easier for wealthy people to pay it than poorer people. But I think on something like air quality, we can't compromise there. We have to put in measures that can stop it. If it was, we could explore this with our colleagues at the County Council who would be responsible for imposing the charges. And I agree with you. I think it's something that we could explore.
Thank you very much. And then the last question to Cabinet members is from Lucy Pegg. Do you have any supplementary on Oxford food strategy? That we have actually done incredibly well. I'm going to invite Chris Merton to come back again and jump ahead to agenda item 14, which I think is the only one that we can push up the agenda in this way, which is the scrutiny update report.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I was briefly panicking as I was pretty sure I hadn't asked any other questions. Scrutiny then. Yes, that is a thing that has happened. Scrutiny has met twice since the last full council. We considered the Thriving Community Strategy, grant allocations, the authority monitoring report, workplace equalities, and the flexible working and disciplinary policies, many of which we have heard about tonight already. Meanwhile, the finance panel has considered treasury management, the performance report, and of course the principal budget documents. 8 recommendations resulted in all, which I am pleased to see Cabinet have engaged with constructively. One recommendation that is quite general that I would like to underscore due to its general applicability relates to the precision and accountability of specific actions. Frequently we receive documents that pledge to work with partners and or stakeholders to achieve a particular goal, which is almost as imprecise as it's possible to be. So we would really appreciate some clarity whenever that sort of form of words heads towards the keyboard. We would really appreciate to have clarity with regards to, is it the council being in the driving seat but cooperating with outside bodies? Are we hoping to facilitate something that's fundamentally out of our control, or where a lack of funding is an issue? Which one of these we're intending and what we are intending specifically to do. We would like to have maximum clarity on that on all matters. I'd like to thank all Cabinet members and officers who've been very generous with their time to attend scrutiny. I'd like also to raise one late-breaking piece of news here, which concerns Scrutiny's meeting on Wednesday this week, in 2 days, which is that before us at that meeting, we have the very important matter of the housing numbers consultation document. And at present, Scrutiny Committee has the conclusions. We have the covering report and 2 of its appendices, but we don't have access to a lot of its supporting materials. So we have some conclusions which cite as their reasoning based on an interim housing and economic land assessment and an interim Greenbelt review, as well as the all-important HENA document. The last one happens to be incidentally available because Cherwell District Council have published it, and I hope that our version is the same. But all 3 of these documents, I would ask that if we're asked to scrutinise the conclusions, we ought also to be able to scrutinise the working that has led to those conclusions, and I would urge Cabinet and officers to please make those available as soon as is practical. Thank you.
Alex, are you going to respond?
As far as I'm aware, and I have just looked, the HENA for one, and maybe the other document as well, is on our website, which is where all the policy background papers are for the local plan, and indeed every strategic plan consultation process. We don't normally post the entire lot to a scrutiny or a cabinet agenda. I mean, we would have, for a local plan, a scrutiny agenda of several thousand pages, which I think might be daunting even for a man as keen on detail as yourself, let alone everyone else. I mean, they're there, and I believe that at your request, officers circulated to the scrutiny officers links to them so people could find them, but they are there if you look up Oxford 2040 local plan and then look for evidence documents and the links from there. So they are all published. They are all, as far as I'm aware, unless I've missed one, on the website, and I'm sure scrutiny members will enjoy their extra background reading that you've asked them to do.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for the Scrutiny Committee, Chair? If not, I notice that we are just meant to note the report, and as we've heard, there is a meeting on Wednesday. Those in favour of noting the report? Any against? No, therefore, we can note it as requested. Now we've done so well, I'm going to suggest, and apparently we can do this, but I first have to point out that if we jump to agenda item 16, which is about the local funding and the full business case for the Cowley Branch Line, there are actually 2 appendices which are confidential, so we can continue to be in public and be filmed if members undertake not to refer to anything that is in those appendices. I hope that you can note that. I'm not quite sure that we can get you to promise not to do so, but if you wanted to raise anything in the course of the discussion, we then have to go into private session. So I exhort you not to refer to anything which is appendices. And so, does anyone here know that they want to raise anything regarding Appendix 1 or Appendix 4? So don't stray into it, and we will continue as is. Okay. So I'm going to invite, first of all, Councillor Upton to propose this, but do we have a seconder? Alex, thank you very much. So would you like to introduce the report, Louise?
Yeah, thank you, Lord Mayor. It is nice to talk about the Cowley Branch Line. It's probably the least controversial part of the transport portfolio I have. I don't get people lobbing insults on either side about it. It's fairly universally welcomed. So the idea of running a passenger service on the Cowley Branch Line is very exciting. People being able to zip in from the Leeds and Littlemore straight into the city centre in under 10 minutes rather than sitting in a traffic jam. And for anyone who works at the business park or the science park or wants to get to the retail park, just being able to get there quickly on the train. So the situation at the moment is that the Network Rail have done an outline business case which was positive, but they themselves have no funding to take that study any further. So if we want it to move to having a full business case to get that worked up, which will be about the details of the route, where the station will go, how those stations will be connected into the existing communities and the employment sites, etc. Then we needed to find the money for that, and we're talking about £4.5 million. That's going to be about 3.26 million for the actual infrastructure and stations bit, and then the public realm and connectivity bit, we'd need another 1.3 million for that feasibility study. And that, as I mentioned in answer to an earlier question, that connectivity feasibility study is also really important to us to make sure that it's not just going to be about the business parks and the science park having good access to these stations, that it's about all of our residents, particularly in some of our more deprived parts of the city, being able to use these stations conveniently and easily. We really feel it is absolutely critical to get this full business case done, because we are going to have to compete with a lot of other national infrastructure projects for government funding in future. And if we don't have a full business case, there's no chance of us getting any funding. But if we do have one, at least that gives us the best chance of getting a Cowley Branch Line funded. So that the report outlines the different large employment sites that have contributed towards this. That required a lot of negotiation, as you can imagine, from our officers to do that. But they have, between us, the county council are involved as well. Between us, we have got the funding to produce this business case. As Tom mentioned earlier, the contracts are due to be signed because the Network Rail's team who did the outline business case are kind of there, in place, ready to go. So if we can get this signed off now, and the contract in place, then they can get on with the full business case work very quickly. So I would urge you to support the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex, do you want to speak now or reserve your right to reply? Okay. Do we have any questions for Louise? Okay, Lawrence.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I welcome this whole idea of reopening the Cowley Branch Line. One thing that came to my attention last week was that the county are looking at, voted to spend some money on looking at reopening the line up to Witney and beyond. And I wondered whether there was any scope for working with the county on the Cowley line to look at whether this would form the basis for a suburban rail network for Oxford.
The Cabinet Member for Development is looking at me and shaking his head strongly. So I'll probably let him answer that. But
I'm sure there'll be ample scope for ambitions around that, but this is a very precise, specific report. I think it would be very easy. I think many of us who've been around a long time have long experience of substantial sums of money being spent on kind of pursuing slightly vague aspirations. The issue here is this is categorically not a vague aspiration, and as the funding mechanism makes clear, it's one that we can realise using tools at our disposal. I think the Cowley Branch Line proposals are massively far in advance of the still very hypothetical Witney discussion. Not least, there is track and signalling and trains currently there in Cowley. There isn't even a track bed or a route to get to Whitney yet. So I think there's still some distance apart. I'm sure all power to colleagues in West Oxfordshire's elbow to get the Whitney project, but I think we don't want to link this to that at this stage. I think that would be inappropriate.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Sarge.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. With your permission, comment and a question. So I welcome this report, and I think this report or this project is quite a few years late. So this should have happened a long time ago. And equally, the question I want to raise is, would you raise and also would you support the same idea in the south and the north of the city, where you got two railway lines lying? For example, you got a Red Bridge Park and Ride. Equally, if you stick a platform behind it, people can park, and if we are serious about people not to driving in the city, so give them the alternative. So the Cowley line is great whenever it happens. Let's hope you get the funding and this become active. Equally, you have same opportunity in the south of the city, building something behind the Red Bridge where the railway line runs, running a couple of carriages into the city. Same equally, you got railway line coming from the north side of the city, so you can have something get done Wolvercourt somewhere to let people come on the couple of carriages to come in. Would you support the idea?
I think maybe Alex is going to respond again.
I was just going to say that in answer to that question, what we have is two specific sites identified in the local plan, which the rail industry have signed up to. That doesn't preclude exploring these further options, and historians of railways, and I think Councillor Foulweather will be one of those, will know that there was a station more or less at where the Red Bridge Park and Ride is now, and not one but two stations in Wolvercote, one on each line, which, the halcyon days of connectivity for Wolvercote, having two railway stations. But these are things I think we can pursue in the fullness of time. I mean, the important thing is, and I think this is an important message for all projects, is focus on the specific thing unrelentingly and deliver it. Don't get distracted by doing other stuff.
Yes, Sheriff Mike.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I'd endorse, well, two remarks. First of all, I'd endorse what Alex has said. There are a number of proposals that I think we should broadly support. I had the pleasure a couple of years ago of walking the part of the route of the former Whitney branch line with members of West Oxfordshire District Council. There are many other potential locations within Oxford where small platforms could be located, but a commuter light rail link in the hand is worth two in the bush. And this is what Linda is looking at me as if that's the worst metaphor anyone has ever used in this council, and probably is. Nevertheless, we're looking here at now. Let me get this right, Lord Mayor. Appendix 2 is not confidential.
Appendix 1 is, Appendix 4 is.
Appendix 2 is public. Okay. We're looking in Appendix 2 at getting this is the platform and signalling and all necessary facilities complete in 3.5 years by middle of 2026, and that will be a massive achievement for Oxford, particularly for the eastern part of the city, because let's not kid ourselves. Oxford has always been choked with traffic. I've lived here for 25 years. It's been choked with traffic for all of that time. Cowley Road in particular is not suitable as a main artery of traffic, and yet it has more buses having to go up and down it and certainly a great number of cars than any other route in the city. And having a railway line going through Littlemore and Blackbird Leys with a 10-minute journey into the centre will be a massive help for for people in a very substantial sector of our city. So let us concentrate on getting that done, first of all, and then we can start to look about extensions to that scheme that we can support.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions, comments from members? If not, I'll give you the final right to sum up, but Alex, in a way, you've had your seconding preempted. Do you want to say anything as seconder?
I would, yes, very briefly in seconding it. I think it is transformative. I think, again, sorry to delve into rail terminology. It's not a light rail; it's an ordinary rail. So the two things are very different, and I'm sure were you to see a collision between the two vehicles, you would understand why they're different and kept separate. What we're talking about here is taking the east-west trains from Bedford and running them through Oxford to the Cowley Branch Line. So it's a win-win. It provides service. So you can now, you will, when this is open, be able to travel from Littlemore to Bedford with ease. And how many people will wish to do that? But that's the objective. But it provides greater capacity at Oxford Station. So my final comment is that just to emphasise that this scheme is entirely dependent on the western developments at Oxford Station. I think it's really important to reflect on that when we look at the horrendous inconvenience that's going to be caused by the Botley Road closure. If that doesn't happen, then this doesn't happen. That is it's not a likely thing. That is a guaranteed thing. Cowley Branch Line will only happen if the western side of the railway station happens. And I think when we talk to our constituents across the city who are going to be affected, and outside the city, of course, who are going to be affected by that closure and inconvenienced by it, I think we need to include the Cowley Branch Line as one of the critical benefits that comes from it.
Thank you. And Louise, to sum up, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to, before any hairs get set running, just to clarify that timetable, the idea of it possibly being completed by December 2026 is absolutely the most optimistic scenario possible. And it would depend on the full business case being made and identifying ways of funding it and then us being able to raise the funds. But if we don't do this, it's definitely not going to be there. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think we should now, sorry, I'm jumping so far ahead. There's a recommendation, we got proposed and seconded, so I think let's put this to the vote. Those in favour, please indicate. Those against? Again, wonderful record, unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. I think we can now, even still we're early, but let's take a break now. We're coming back at 7, and then we're first going to have it had to be filmed because you know what it's like in Kharkiv. Did you hear on the news they were being attacked with missiles by the wonderful Russians today? So rather than be hostage to fortune, we have a film from the mayor of Kharkiv. And so those of us here and anyone too near the screen should move further back to be able to see that bit of the presentation at the start of the meeting at 7 o'clock. So, see you back here at 7 o'clock. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to be here very briefly because then I'm going to go to be able to see the screen. But you may wonder, at the back we have Sergei, who is here from the city of Kharkiv. So he's going to take, just during this item, the presentation by the mayor and then the response by Ed. So he's going to take some pictures to send back to Kharkiv. So thank you very much. People here better go to be able to see the screen.
Шановний пане лорд-мер, шановні члени Ради, шановні гості, я радий вітати вас від імені жителів міста Харкова. Дякую за можливість звернутися до вас саме в цей час, коли українсько-британські відносини перебувають у стані надзвичайного піднесення. Ми шануємо народ Великої Британії за солідарність та підтримку України в нашій боротьбі з російським агресором. Гадаю, що Об'єднане Королівство та місто Оксфорд, зокрема, розуміють наші обставини. Адже понад 70 років тому Британія, як і Україна зараз, потерпала від ворожої навали. Харків один із перших прийняв на себе віроломний удар ворога. Але місто вистояло і подолало практично усі труднощі. Навіть у найтяжчі часи у Харкові не зупинялась робота комунальних підприємств, сфери послуг, органів місцевої влади. За надзвичайну хоробрість, мужність та героїзм його жителів Харкову було присвоєно почесне звання «Місто-герой». У Харкова та Оксфорда багато спільного, бо вони є осередками освіти та науки, культури та мистецтва своїх регіонів. Наші міста мають давні університетські традиції, незважаючи на величезні втрати та збитки. Ми з впевненістю дивимось в майбутнє. У розбудові двосторонніх відносин на рівні територіальних громад, таких як Оксфорд та Харків, ми бачимо можливість залучити передовий досвід світових експертів до відновлення Харкова. Шановні пані та панове, дозвольте мені ще раз висловити вдячність за вашу підтримку. Сподіваюсь на зустріч з вами вже у мирному, відбудованому Харкові. Дякую за увагу.
I suspect some of you couldn't see the subtitles, so I don't know, have you all been given a copy? I will read it quickly just so it's on the record. My dear Lord Mayor, dear members of the Council, dear guests, I'm pleased to welcome you on behalf of the citizens of Kharkiv. Thank you for the opportunity to address you at this time when Ukrainian-British relations are at an all-time high. We honour the people of Great Britain for their solidarity and support of Ukraine in our fight against the Russian aggressor. I believe that the United Kingdom and the city of Oxford in particular understand our circumstances because more than 70 years ago, Britain, like Ukraine today, suffered from the enemy attack. Kharkiv was one of the first cities to receive the enemy's treacherous blow, but the city has survived and overcome almost all of the difficulties. Even in the most difficult times, Kharkiv's municipal enterprises, services sector, and local authorities continued to work. For the extraordinary bravery, courage, and heroism of its residents, Kharkiv has been awarded the honorary title of Hero City. Kharkiv and Oxford have a lot in common, for they are the centres of education and science, culture, and art of their regions. Our cities have long university traditions. In my opinion, the very fact that Kharkiv has chosen the European path of development is one of the reasons for the extreme cruelty of our enemy. Despite the huge losses and damage, we are confident about the future. In building bilateral relations at the level of territorial communities, such as Oxford and Kharkiv, we see an opportunity to involve the best practices of world experts in the restoration of Kharkiv. Dear ladies and gentlemen, let me once again express my gratitude for your support. I look forward to meeting you in a peaceful, rebuilt Kharkiv. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for your address, Mr. Terekov. And first of all, may I express my solidarity with the people of Kharkiv and all of Ukraine as victims of Vladimir Putin's disgraceful war of aggression. I've been as humbled and impressed by Ukraine's resistance as I've been saddened by the appalling nature of Russia's attacks on Ukrainian territory and Ukrainian civilians. I'm glad that many people in Oxford are supporting Ukraine. In the early stages of conflict, supplies were gathered, notably by Oxford's Polish community, and transferred to Ukraine. And of course, we've been in contact with our twin city, Wrocław, which has close links to Lviv. I'm especially heartened that so many people in our city have opened their homes to people from Ukraine, while others are giving of their time to assist those who are here in Oxford. In Oxford, we are proud of our designation as a city of sanctuary, and we see a duty to assist those in need wherever they come from. Oxford values its international links, and we are, of course, open to expanding these. The exact designation of a link is much less important, in my view, than what actually happens in contact between cities, and in particular, between people of different cities. We're therefore very open to assisting efforts to bring people from Kharkiv and people from Oxford together, mindful that what is possible now will be different from what is possible in the happier times we hope are ahead. Our officers will be very willing to meet with you, of course via video link, or with people from Kharkiv who are here in the United Kingdom at the moment, in order to discuss this PERSA. And we do also, of course, for members of the public, have information available on our website. I was very fortunate to visit Ukraine in 2011, although sadly not Kharkiv. And I remember the richness of the culture I saw and the warmth of the reception I received. This has compounded my horror and sadness at this war, and I sincerely appreciate your suggestion of a meeting in peaceful, rebuilt Kharkiv. That day cannot come soon enough.
Thank you very much. Sergei, who is sitting at the back, he's been filming this to send back to the city council in Kharkiv, and I hope they are pleased, I'm sure they will be, with the very warm reception that the presentation from the mayor has received from this council. There are some Ukrainian students who I informed that Sergei was here today, so he's now going out to join them. Some are from Kharkiv, so he's going to go and meet them outside. But thank you very much for coming, and our greetings, obviously, to your city, especially like yesterday with a dreadful another wave of missiles from Russia. Thank you very much. After that, it's rather from the sublime to the ridiculous, but let us now, an important item, opposing voter ID. I think Councillor Grant is proposing, and Councillor Smoten is seconding. Oh, sorry, we have jumped ahead. There is another question. I was looking at the wrong side. I got carried away there. So, is Jennifer Stanton here?
Thank you very much for letting me come and ask this question. Oh, is it not on? Thank you very much for letting me come and ask this question. Oxford City Council declared a climate emergency in January 2019, one of the first councils to do so. But 4 years later continues to bank with Barclays, the largest funder of fossil fuels in Europe. Last November, Extinction Rebellion presented a letter to the City Council asking that they move their account away from Barclays Bank. Council leader Susan Brown responded that Barclays had the best social and ethical record among banks which tendered for the account. However, the Good Shopping Guide rates Barclays as the least ethical of all UK banks, with the lowest score of 35 out of 100. Meanwhile, Barclays continues to invest billions in fossil fuels. It is therefore unconscionable for the City Council to continue to bank with Barclays. Will the City Council commit to moving its account within the next year to a bank that is not contributing to the climate emergency through investment in fossil fuel extraction and use, by putting the account out to tender with the requirement of no direct investment in fossil fuels as part of the tender? Will the City Council also inform Barclays Bank that the reason for re-tendering their account is Barclays' extensive funding of fossil fuels? And I would just like to say that if you want more information, there's a website called Fossil Banks, which shows Barclays invests in things like fracked oil and gas, tar sands, and Arctic oil and gas financing. So some of the most, worst of the kind of things you can look for.
Thank you very much for a very succinct question. Thank you very much. Ed Turner has prepared a response. I don't know if you've seen it, so I suggest that Ed reads out the response, please.
Yeah, thanks, Lord Mayor. If it's okay, I think it works better if I sit down with the microphones. I think we're all very sympathetic to the thrust of this question, to be completely honest. Historically, Oxford City Council held its current account with the cooperative bank. But when that bank decided to withdraw from the local authority market, the council was forced to procure a replacement banker. Of the bidding tenderers, Barclays scored joint highest in relation to social and ethical policies. The other two bidders were also major high street banks. This is about our current account, not our investments. We would obviously have welcomed a wider choice of bank, but there are limited banks willing to operate in the local authority current account market, and the council can't function without a current account. The council does engage with Barclays on environmental, social and governance matters. It's a subject at each of the account manager meetings, and I'm told by the officers that attend those that the officers are very insistent on pursuing these questions in those meetings. They also ask for ESG information from all of our other counterparties and challenge them on this area as well. Clearly, the council takes climate change and the efforts to combat it very seriously, and we will continue to undertake our own measures towards change and work with our suppliers and customers towards a sustainable future. The approach that Barclays say they take to influence their customers to move away from harmful environmental activities and make targets gradually tighter is an approach taken by others as well. Other banks who work within the local authority market take a similar approach and have targets relating to 2050 alongside Barclays. The Council has a commitment, in line with local authority codes of practice, to consider the environmental, social and governance ratings of its counterparties when considering its treasury management policies. The ESG is a rounded measure of the sustainability of a company and its practices. Of the banks that are active within the local authority market, and again, there are 3 that bid, and there aren't more dealing in current accounts that we're aware of. According to the ESG rating agency Sustainalytics, Barclays had the best of the ESG ratings. That being said, I have to be honest, I very much sympathise with the thrust of the question, and we would welcome a wider choice of banks next time. And of course, environmental, social and ethical policies will be part of that procurement.
Thank you very much, and thank you for posing your question. Now we sadly have to move on to the rest of our business, but you can't respond, I'm afraid. But thank you very much for your question. Okay, let us now. Thank you. Come on. Thank you, thank you. We have given you a chance to sing. Please, will you stop now? Stop now, please. I will have to. Can you ask them? Come on, come on. You've had your moment of song, please. Thank you. Thank you. You heard the answer. Thank you. That's the most musical council meeting I've been to. Thank you very much. I think we now come to the questions on the motions, for debate. I'm now trying to find them in my papers. Here we are, somewhere here. Have you got them here? So the first one is the one I was jumping the gun and said Andrew Gant is going to propose instead of Tom Landell-Mills. And Chris Moten is going to second it, and you will have the right to speak after Andrew's spoken or reserve your right to speak later. So, Andrew, would you like to introduce your motion, please?
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Delighted to do that. Let's hope a musical interlude becomes a regular part of our council meetings. I hope and expect that this motion will receive cross-party support. So perhaps we can get through that expeditiously. It's very clear what this is about. This government is trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. When it comes to anti-democratic legislation, America has been ahead of us. So let's listen to what the American Civil Liberties Union says. Voter identification laws are part of an ongoing strategy to roll back decades of progress on voting rights. Minority voters disproportionately lack ID, in-person fraud is vanishingly rare, and voter ID requirements are a solution in search of a problem. Well, we're not America, of course, but we are still doing the same. Let's listen to the words of our own Electoral Reform Society, which describes it as voter ID, an expensive distraction, and tells us that millions of people lack the strict form of ID, that research shows that more disadvantaged groups are less likely to have ID, that the government's own figures suggest, and this rather took me back, so I'll just quote it, that over a decade this is going to cost £180 million, and that there is a 90% confidence in the safety of our voting system among voters. And rightly so, because in 2019 there were 33 allegations of impersonation out of 58 million votes cast. Well, that's not a bad percentage. Layla Moran MP has campaigned vociferously on this when the government brought it in December. She commented, "Defending our rights and our democracy are extremely important to me," and quoted two constituents. Young people in Oxford are very concerned. One is said that she is really worried about what the changes will mean for voting amongst young people. To quote, "It's outrageous that the Oyster 60-plus card will be considered valid ID, but the almost identical Oyster 18-plus card will not. This is clearly an attack on young people and will disproportionately impact their ability to vote." Another young person in our local area told Ms. Moran, "There is so much evidence that people who are young, disabled or trans and people of colour are far less likely to have photo ID. These changes are restricting who can engage in our democracy, which is simply unfair and undemocratic." So if it's so blindingly obvious why this is a bad idea, Why is our government doing it? Well, I think the answer is also blindingly obvious to everybody in this chamber. It's because it makes it harder for people to vote.
Can you pull it together, your 3 minutes?
Vote for the Conservative Party. That is why they are doing it. It is of a piece with their anti-democratic instincts, the way that they have attacked the judiciary and tried to limit the restraints on the executive. It is a bad idea, it is not needed, it is anti-democratic, it is unfair, and it needs to be resisted at every opportunity.
Chris, do you want to use your right now to speak or reserve it?
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Yes, I'll say my piece now. The Elections Act of 2022 was a bundle of ugly, unnecessary measures designed to erode democracy in this country. In passing the act, the government has interfered in the Electoral Commission, taken the franchise from many EU voters, and enforced first past the post in the few elections where we were lucky enough to have a modern, functioning voting system. Today, we're focusing on mandatory voter ID, which, as Andrew mentions, it threatens to disenfranchise people from all walks of life in UK elections. It is a page straight from the US Republican playbook to dent the participation of opposition voters and an attempt to prop up rule by a privileged minority. It cannot have escaped the government's notice that younger voters and people who are less well off are both groups that are less likely to support them and that are less likely to have the required forms of ID to vote. As if to show their hand as clearly as possible, they have permitted the use of older people's travel passes as ID while declining equivalent passes for younger people. Voter ID set out to solve a non-problem of voter impersonation, which is vanishingly rare. I urge councillors to support this motion and use this council's voice to oppose this violence against democratic principles. Thank you.
Thank you. I have Susan the leader, then Imogen, and then Alex down. Anybody else want to speak? Tiago? Any others? Thank you. So Susan, please.
Yeah, just briefly, Lord Mayor. I mean, this is clearly a move straight out of the Trump playbook. I think we entirely recognise here what is happening. I think one of the significant things from my perspective is the groups of people who currently are not likely to have ID of any sort that would fit the documentation that the government is requiring. There is, as well as the groups that have already been identified, and particularly young people, we know that people of lower socioeconomic status are less likely to have passports, driving licences and other forms of ID that would fit these requirements. And again, we know that this is a group of people who are less likely to vote for the Conservatives. So I think we are very, very clear as to why this is being done. It is totally undemocratic. It is an absolutely fundamental right that people fought for many, many years to ensure that everybody in this country was entitled to have a vote. And this government seems intent on taking it away from anyone who dares to think that they might not vote for the Conservatives. So I thoroughly support the motion and will be voting for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Imogen.
I support the motion, and Susan covered a lot of what I wanted to say, in that this is a class issue, this is a race issue, this is a gender issue. I was born in South Africa almost a year to the day after the first democratic elections there, to parents who fought against apartheid. And what they've taught me is that democracy is precious, it is hard won, but also they've taught me to notice that it is under threat in this country. Our right to protest, our right to strike, and our right to vote. If the Tories spent as much time clamping down on tax dodging by those that fund them and those amongst their own ranks as they did on addressing this non-issue of voter fraud, then the country would be all the richer for it. This just serves to show that they are a government for the rich and not for the people. Thank you.
Alex.
fully support the motion. It sounded familiar, and in fact some of the text sounded familiar that's been mentioned, because we passed an identical motion exactly a year ago. It was familiar because I drafted the relevant bit of it. Hosnia drafted most of it, but the paragraph in question was mine. The thing I wanted to draw attention to was that the number that was expected to be disenfranchised by this is 2 million. The number of people convicted of voter fraud in 2017 was 1, as is a problem, a solution in search of a problem on a fairly grand scale. But I did want to just reflect on and sound a note of warning. This isn't just a wicked proposal, it's a clever proposal, because the more that people like us here, the movers of the motion, and it's Andrew or Chris or Susan who's spoken, the more we raise our concerns about what the Tories are doing, the more we will signal to people that it's going to be too difficult to vote, and we will have achieved what they want this legislation to achieve. So we have to be careful about how we oppose this, and we have to be careful about how we address it. It's a nasty, vindictive, wicked thing that they are doing. It is profoundly undemocratic. We just have to be careful not to do their work for them.
Thank you. Tiago.
Thank you. Thank you, Lord Mayor. I would like to say I support, of course, this motion, but I would like to share the experience in Portugal. In Portugal, to vote, we need the ID, but the problem we have, to everybody have ID, and in UK we don't have that. And this is, I think, is the key point. And this is why I feel very, very, very strange when I see this Conservative government want to implement that, because in my perspective, it should be different. We should have actions really to promote more people vote, not create barriers for people don't vote. And this is why I feel very, very strange that. Another thing I also to share in Portugal, if you forget to come with your ID, it's cultural, everybody have ID in your pocket, but if you forget, you can vote if 2 people recognize you and sign off to say, yeah, this is the person to vote. I only do want to share this point and to say thank you very much for this motion. I will support this motion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hosnia also indicated, please.
As Councillor Imogen-Thomas indicated, it really is a race, class and gender issue. I'm a councillor in Northfield Brook, which has one of the lowest rates of voting in council elections. And clearly, class is a huge factor there. Capacity and the fact that a lot of people don't have passports, and having driving licenses and passports, it is clearly a class issue. And with my other hat on, with the Migrant Champion hat on, one of the councillors from Cambridgeshire County Council, who's involved with our Migrant Champion Forum, which is due to be launched on 23rd of February, she actually put a motion forward in support of non-EU and non-Commonwealth citizens who don't have a democratic say in electing local representatives, to get the right to extend the right of voting in local elections to them in the same way that EU and Commonwealth citizens do. So I hope that, though I agree with Alex that clearly the government is very good at manipulating the media, some of which they run, as we know from YouGov, I do think, and other polls, I do think it is important that we do the work on the ground where we are as local councillors to push back against these kind of tactics. So thank you for bringing this motion.
Thank you. I believe we probably are airing similar issues now. I'm going to invite, if that's okay, Andrew to sum up, and then we can proceed to a vote.
Well, thank you, colleagues, for your support and for some interesting insights. To Tiago for bringing an insight from a fellow European democracy that had its own share of issues in getting to that situation. To Councillor Thomas for reminding me rather worryingly that there are councillors in this chamber who were born after the first democratic election in South Africa, which makes me feel very old because I remember it very well, as I'm sure many of us do. And to others for their comments. Just to pick up on what Alex said, of course, the reason the motion has come back to relevance is that the government has now given us the detail about forms of ID and all that kind of thing. And I'm very glad to have the opportunity to revisit the issue in this council. There is a debate to be had about, the extent to which we need to draw people's attention to this. I think my instinct is to tell people the truth, frankly. This is undermining democracy. That has been made clear in this chamber. We need to oppose it, and we need to say so loud and clear.
Thank you very much. So I suggest we've got a proposer and seconder. Can we proceed to a vote? All those in favour, please indicate. Against? Again, unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. Now we are making good progress. We may actually get 3 motions discussed today. The next one is fixing Oxford's water, and it's being proposed by Councillor Jarvis, and I believe that the amendment has been accepted. Is that correct? In which case we can proceed directly to debate the amended motion. So please, would you like to introduce?
Yes, thank you, Lord Mayor.
Sorry, thank you, Lois.
Yeah. Thank you, Lord Mayor. So 34 years of water privatisation has been 34 years of disaster. This has been shown to be true time and time again. It has been shown in the £72 billion the private water companies have pocketed to their shareholders. It's been shown in the 3 billion litres of water that leak out of our aching infrastructure every single day. And it has been shown in the combined total of 2.7 million hours a year that private water companies discharge sewage into our rivers and seas. This is what you get when you run a basic service for profit rather than for people and for the planet. But while the whole tree of water privatisation is undoubtedly rotten, Thames Water is among the worst of the apples. It is Thames Water that loses 635 million litres of water every day. It is Thames Water that has allowed underpasses in Oxford to flood because of their broken infrastructure. And it is Thames Water that has been fined over £32 million for water pollution. Privatisation of water in general and Thames Water's failures in particular are harming Oxford's natural environment and ripping off our residents. That's why this motion would do 2 important things. First, it would make clear that this council believes that the privatisation of water must be brought to an end, and to lobby the Westminster government to bring our water back into public ownership where it belongs. Second, it would demand much-needed accountability of Thames Water for its failure to properly manage our water supply, requesting the company's CEO meet with councillors to allow us to question their performance and raise the issues our residents have raised with us. So tonight, let's show clearly that this council won't stand for our residents being ripped off any longer. We won't stand for a vital public service being run into the ground, and we won't stand for a private company prioritising shareholder dividends over people and the planet. Please support this motion.
Lois, do you want to speak now?
Yes, please.
Or reserve your right? You want to speak now.
I'll speak now. Thank you. Thank you, Lord Mayor. In 2023, it is utterly shameful that shareholders in our water companies make huge profits and water bosses take home massive pay packets, whilst the companies continue to dump raw sewage in our waterways, lose huge volumes of water through leakage, and charge customers too much for providing a basic human need. Here are some eye-watering figures to digest. On pay and dividends, 72 billion has been paid to water company shareholders in the last 30 years. Our Thames Water CEO, appointed in 2020, is paid £2 million a year. On leaks, monopoly water companies lose 20 to 25% of water from their mains. On sewage, Thames Water discharged raw sewage into the River Thames and its tributaries, including the River Windrush, Tame, Evenlode and Och, 5,028 times in 2021, according to data analysed by the Oxford Rivers Improvement Campaign. And in 2021, for more than 68,000 hours, Thames Water dumped untreated effluent into the river systems around Oxford. Councillors will recall that a section of Wolvercote Mill Stream at Port Meadow was designated as an official bathing area in April 22. But in November 22, the EA announced that the official status of that water at the bathing area in Wolvercote had been designated as poor, the lowest possible rating. The data indicates E. coli and intestinal enterococci were present at levels higher than it is safe to swim in. And in the case of intestinal enterococci, the levels were more than twice the recommended amount. And even today, from last Thursday up until this very morning, for over 100 hours, raw sewage was being continuously discharged into the Windrush, which flows into the Thames and then through our city. And looking to the future, the situation is dire and the water company's plans to improve our water infrastructure are inadequate. It's estimated that Oxford and Witney treatment works can currently only cope with 62% of the capacity needed for our population. And future development in Oxford will put further pressure on our inadequate infrastructure, and certainly residents in West Oxford are already asking how the sewers will cope with the new developments coming to our area. And the broken pipe on Botley Road is not likely to be fixed until next summer, putting cyclists at greater risk every day. So to conclude, the current system of monopolised private water companies stinks. We cannot continue to reward failure, and we need change now. And we need to clean up this mess. To end leaks, stop sewage discharge, and cut bills, we need to take water supply back into public ownership. I urge you to support this motion.
I know Councillor Smith, then Councillor Munkonge, then the Sheriff, and then Tiago. Okay, please.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. This motion is called Fixing Oxford's Water, and I thought it was appropriate to properly acknowledge the important step towards fixing Oxford's water that was taken last year, as Councillor Muddyman mentioned, with the granting of the official bathing water status. And really, to acknowledge the fact that that started with a cross-party motion in this chamber, and that went on to support a great deal of work in a partnership, the Oxford Rivers Project, which this council was very proud to be part of and to support, but which really harnessed the work, the energy of hundreds, if not thousands, of volunteers across Oxford who worked as citizen scientists testing the water, who volunteered to survey river users, whether they were fishing, swimming or boating, and many, many more who just answered questionnaires about their own river usage. So we've got that bathing water status. It does mean that now that official monitoring is taking place, which wouldn't otherwise be done. So it is, a tool in our box in terms of holding Thames Water to account. But of course, it's not enough on its own. And I'm pleased that we'll be supporting this motion, because in the long term, the only proper fix is going to be common ownership of the public water supply and the water treatment work. So thank you for bringing this motion.
Thank you. Chair Munkonge.
First of all, I just want to thank Councillor Jarvis for bringing this motion to us, and obviously Councillor Madman for supporting it, and obviously for our colleagues, Councillor Wrighton and Hunt for the amendments. One thing I was intrigued is just to go and dig a little bit to find out who are the shareholders. Apparently, it's a very complex structure, because I wanted to understand where the profit or the dividends are going. I couldn't find the information, but thanks to Google, I have to find the largest shareholders, and the information, unfortunately, it was going up to 2012, and the latest I had is 2013. I was intrigued to find the major shareholders up to 2023. I couldn't get in that information. Probably I have to dig more. My research was to find out why who's getting the most of money, and to highlight the problem of putting profit before people. So really, the problem we are seeing nowadays is years of sending money to the shareholders and not to invest in the infrastructure. That was wrong. 392 million over the period has gone to the shareholders. If only 50%, 10%, 5% could have been invested in the leaks, then we could have a brilliant water services. So I support this motion as a cabinet member for leisure and parks. I also call upon to bring it in the public hands, but we can only bring it in the public hand with a responsible government in power. Thank you.
Thank you. Mike Rowley, Sheriff.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As colleagues have alluded to, this council has done a great deal to try to clean up Oxford's water, including, of course, getting bathing water status for the River Thames. But there is only so much the council the council itself can do. And what I think is important about this motion is that with cross-party support, we are now going to have a campaigning position that the only answer to the problems, the pollution and the wastage of water in Oxford is to take Britain's water into public ownership. I'm sure that is the only solution. As colleagues will know, I sometimes go swimming in open water. The irony is that thanks to Thames Water, the cleanest of the many places that I've gone open water swimming has been Littlemore Underpass. It's joking apart. It's completely unacceptable that designated bathing places have got sewage in them, thanks to the what is not only the incompetence of the water company, but the known lack of capacity of the water company's systems, able to deal with less than 2/3 of the sewage produced by the population of Oxfordshire, something the water company knows about and has done nothing about. They're quite deliberately making these discharges because it interferes with the enormous profit margins that have been, it would interfere with the enormous profit margins that have been described to do something about it. That is unacceptable. To end the failed experiment of privatisation is, as the text that the amendment has added into this motion quite rightly says, it's the only way to guarantee the health and safety of Oxford's residents and of the cherished waterways which so many people enjoy.
Thank you very much. Councillor Tiago Corrais.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like, as a City Council for Littlemore, to say thank you very much for this motion. And I believe the residents in Littlemore also said thank you. Because the last 5 months, as everybody know, the Littlemore residents suffer too much about the leaks of the Thames water. It was two big leaks. But it's not only these two leaks, it's also in people send me emails, complain about leaks in gardens and so on. And what I feel sometimes very angry is because Thames Water don't take responsibility for these leaks and really don't care, in my perspective. And I think it's important to understand when some people speak about the private companies, about the efficiency. This is really a proof as private companies is not efficient for all the system. Because of course leak water is not efficient. and especially don't take care of the issues of the residents. This is why I want to say thank you very much for this motion, and I will support it.
Thank you very much. Joe Sanderson.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So many of the correct statistics have already been put forward by Councillors Muddiman and Jarvis, and so I won't repeat those. And likewise, struggle with E. coli enterococci, which is one of the very harmful bacteria that are killing the fish and taking the life out of the water. As we know, Thames Water has been pouring untreated sewage upstream from Witney and Cassington into our stretch of the Thames at Wolvercote. And following a cross-party motion in this chamber, as well as successful protests and Westminster debate by Leila Moran MP, the government responded by granting us bathing water status, which sounded like a victory, but it was a hollow one. It only means monitoring the pollution, not getting them to clean up the water. They've even been dumping sewage in dry weather on the majority of days this January, and as we've heard, this is illegal. Large local developments being built nearby will put more strain on an already vulnerable system. Oxford North alone, Labour's great idea not, is building 1 million square foot of office space just up the road from Port Meadow, and pressure is mounting now on the sewage system. Harmful chemicals from agriculture runoff also affect water quality. We need a system that's going to work sooner than the nearly 30 years we've been promised. In Sweden, they separate rainwater from sewage. Installations lead stormwater away in separate pipes so that foul water doesn't end up in rivers. Why aren't Thames Water upgrading their treatment system like this? Thames Water's Director of Strategy, Catherine Ross, said in the Oxford Mail she was putting £9 million into upgrading Whitney's sewage treatment works. 4 days later, she told Radio 4 Today programme it was going to be 8.5 million. At that rate of cutbacks, there'd have been nothing left by last Saturday. Then I read on Saturday it was going to be 15 million, so their abacus is in very poor shape. However, we know they made £500 million in profits the first 6 months of 2022, so there's no shortage of funds for shareholder dividends, whatever they say. As for salaries, £3 million package for the CEO of Thames Water and management bonuses for her and the Environment Agency. Its head, Sir James Bevan, defended his own and other top executives' large bonuses, saying, "I think we do tough jobs and experience some stresses and strains that no one else has to carry." Well, he should try being a city councillor. And this after acknowledging some of his own staff used food banks. Oxfordshire and elsewhere has seen the official regulator Ofwat, DEFRA, the Environment Agency, and Thames Water play a game of ping-pong over our heads, avoiding any real accountability.
Can you pull it together, please?
Sure. Let alone proper communication at the top, despite the hard work offered by ordinary people in these agencies. Environmental campaign group World Justice are taking legal action against Ofwat, which has revealed shocking failings. It's not so much Ofwat, but off where. We need joined-up thinking and action. Thames Water say putting untreated sewage into the rivers is unacceptable to them. We say the same, and that it stinks. The system is opaque like the river water. I hope everyone on all sides of the chamber will join me in saying, clean it up now.
Thank you. I have a feeling that there is great consensus here, but I will allow the other councillor for Wolvercote, Stephen, and finally I'll let the leader say a word. But that's it, and then we will go to a vote. Stephen.
Thanks very much indeed, Lord Mayor. Well, she's too modest to mention it, but like the Sheriff, my ward colleague is one of those hardy souls, of whom there are quite a few in our ward. Wolvercote Bathing Place is rightly famous, who enjoys what I believe is called wild swimming. And I have to admit, I've got absolutely no idea of the attraction at all, especially in this weather. And I would myself be deeply reluctant to participate, even if the water quality were impeccable. But it's quite clear that the only reason why people should be reluctant to take a dip in the Thames is that they are, like me, wusses. The notion that you might become deeply ill because of wild swimming, because of the pollution in the water, simply shouldn't be a factor, and it's a shameful matter that it is. But I'd like to remind colleagues of another significant aspect of the scandal that we're addressing here tonight. In the context of a climate emergency, river and waterway pollution is a menace not only to wild swimmers, but also to the environment as a whole. To have an irresponsible company like Thames Water pouring raw effluent into our waterways is damaging to fish and to birds and to water-going mammals, to the environment in its entirety. And it's happening, as colleagues point out, to protect the company's profit margins for no other reason. I hope and expect that colleagues will pass this motion overwhelmingly.
Thank you. Susan.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. As someone who grew up in Oxford, swimming in Wolvercote Bathing Place, not in the winter, I have to tell you, but at least occasionally. And at one point, we even had like freshwater mussels, and the river actually got cleaned up a lot. And we are now going backwards. We're now going backwards big time in terms of the amount of pollution that is going into our rivers. And it isn't acceptable. It's absolutely disgraceful that one of the very first tweets I saw on New Year's Day was Thames Water telling us that they were polluting our rivers. You know, Happy New Year from Thames Water. We're pumping your rivers full of sewage again. And that's been a practically daily occurrence for weeks and months. So I think we are all agreed that it's totally unacceptable and that Thames Water have a big job to do to convince us that they are a responsible authority. And the truth is, it's bigger than that, isn't it? It is about government regulation. It is about a whole change in the way that water is regulated and owned and managed in this country. Not least because of some of the issues that have been raised by Councillor Samuelson, and the agricultural impact on our water systems is huge. It's not something that would be in our ability to regulate as a local authority without much agricultural land, but it does have a huge impact on the rivers that flow through our city. So we need our government to take this seriously, and we need water companies to take this seriously. It would be wonderful if Thames Water were to turn up and actually agree to have some debate with us. We'll have to wait and see if, having passed this motion and asking Joey to write a letter, whether that actually happens. I would very much welcome it if it does, and I think we'd all have a lot of questions. So I commend the motion to everybody and will be supporting it.
And now, Chris Jarvis, would you like to sum up for the motion?
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you to everyone who's spoken thus far, and for the many words that could be said about Thames Water, and indeed those that have been today. Given that there appears to be consensus, I won't take up any time. I'll just say that, as we have made clear today, water privatisation is a legalised scam. Please vote for this motion.
Thank you very much. Now, all those in favour, please indicate. Against? Abstaining? Again, yet another unanimous vote. Thank you very much. We now where there is an amendment which I believe is still being tabled, has not been accepted by Councillor Aziz. Is that correct?
We have accepted the amendments.
Yeah. So therefore, we are going to be debating the amended motion. So with that, that makes it easier. So would you like, please, to... Sorry?
Sorry, can I just check? The text that's been circulated only accepts part of the amendment. Can I just check whether you've accepted the whole of the amendment?
We broadly agree with the wording. There was a bit of a discussion, but we've decided to agree with your amendments fully.
Excellent.
Okay, so there we are, you're happy. So, yes. So, you are going to propose, and Louise is going to second, is that correct? Yes. Would you like, please, to introduce?
Yes, so this motion is focused on this council calling for an end to the Tory cost of living crisis. I would like to emphasise the fact that this is obviously a political-made crisis, and one way of ending the Tory cost of living crisis is by getting the Tories out of government. The cost of living crisis is deepening poverty, inequalities and insecurity amongst thousands of people, families and communities across our city. All of us councillors know that our casework is increasing based on this as well. We have many, many families in need contacting us daily asking for help and assistance. 12 years of Tory austerity and brutal central government funding cuts to councils such as ours continues to have a catastrophic impact on services and community support for working people. The COVID pandemic has also pushed many people into further hardships, along with independent and small businesses finding it impossible to survive. So you've got the motion in front of you. I'm not going to read through all of it, but I think it's really important that we collectively as a council back this motion. It is a disgrace that there is a cost of living crisis in a country that is as rich as this. It is also a disgrace that this government continues to point to the crisis in Ukraine as being the reason why there is an energy crisis. We know that it goes far deeper than that. We also know that people have tried to survive the last 12 plus years of austerity, on top of that COVID, and now this. It's just devastating to see the state of what's happening to people up and down this country and here in our city as well. I do want to point out the fact that the increases in inequalities are specifically racialized as well, which is also devastating. There's plenty of data out there, and one of the most recent sets of data came from the Runnymede Trust report. I think that we can all agree, I hope, that we should be condemning this government. We should be rejecting any attempts by the Tories to further increase their austerity measures against our city. And I call on all councillors here to work together in a unified way to oppose this cost of living crisis and to work together to try and help as many people, communities and families across our city through this crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I need to check. Louise, you're happy to go along with the amendment, the amended motion, yes?
Yes, I am.
And I'm looking to fellow councillors. Are we willing to go along with the amended motion? Yes, so we're going to debate that. So, do you want to speak now, Louise, or wait?
I'll have a quick go now. Thank you. There was a cartoon in Private Eye last week, which was a group of people sitting around a table, clearly meant to be Tory politicians. And one of them is saying, what we need is a good economic argument for feeding hungry children. And I thought, well, I could give you some moral and social reasons why you should, but I think we could probably give them lots of good economic reasons too. Hungry children don't do well in school, which means they'll end up less well qualified and less able to get productive jobs. Hungry and cold children get ill and need more GP and more hospital appointments. Families evicted from their homes and placed in bed and breakfast will cost us a lot more than giving them a little bit more help with housing benefit now. So I think there are plenty of economic reasons for feeding the hungry and housing the homeless. But I've said enough this evening, and I'm going to hand over to a lot of my colleagues now, I think, who will be able to give you plenty of reasons based on human decency. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I saw Lubna put her hand up. I then saw Chris Jarvis and now Edward and Hosnier. Sorry, let me just note it. Hosnier, Chris, and someone else over there. Who was it? Well, maybe I've picked them all up. Okay. And Mike, yes, sorry. Okay.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing this motion here today. The Tory cost of living crisis has hit the poorest the hardest. Britain is facing its biggest cost of living catastrophe in decades. Because of this, we're seeing more and more people not having enough money to make ends meet than ever before. Throughout 2022, 424,000 people accessed the debt and crisis support. While many are feeling the pinch, people with certain protected characteristics are more likely to be in financial crisis. Some of these reasons include an increase in the cost of living that's hit the poorest households the hardest. This is because they are less likely to have money put away for a rainy day, and certain people are more likely to be poor due to the structural inequalities. This includes racially minoritized communities, for example, of the Bangladeshi and the Pakistani heritage, single parents who are predominantly women, and disabled people. Some groups have been more affected by real-term cuts to benefits and public services over the past decade, and this includes disabled people and families with more than 2 children. Some people are less able than others to increase their hours of paid work, i.e. people with caring responsibilities. The unequal impacts of inflation means that some groups are more likely to take the brunt of the economic crisis. Not only does this cause additional strain for people whose food bills take up larger proportion of their overall budget, but people on lower incomes in the urban areas may be paying disproportionately more. The only way of affecting the real change is to support this motion, to challenge these, and it's an essential part of our advocacy function to do our best. Just closing, I'd just like to say, we can also see that women are more likely than men to access food bank support, which thankfully we've got in Oxford.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Now, Chris Jarvis.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'll be incredibly brief. And thank you to Councillors Aziz and Upton for bringing this motion, and indeed to Labour Group for accepting the amendment. I just have a couple of points I wanted to say, largely speaking to those specific elements in the motion that, as amended, that have been put in. Firstly, I think it's incredibly important that we're debating this motion tonight for two reasons. One, because right now in Parliament, the House of Commons is debating the minimum services bill, minimum service levels bill, which is a disgraceful, unjust and undemocratic attack on the right to strike. And that must be resisted, and it's right that this motion makes clear that as a council we support the right to strike, and we support those workers who are standing up and fighting injustice and fighting for fair pay, decent conditions, and for our public services. It's also important because on Wednesday, 500,000 workers in this country will be going on strike, including many in our city, and the amended motion makes clear that we applaud those workers and those trade unions who are making the stand, who are standing up and are fighting for fair pay and justice. And the breaking news we heard earlier is that the firefighters union, the FBU, will be joining the many other unions that are taking industrial action to address the cost of living crisis, having had pay suppression for many, many years. The second thing I wanted to mention briefly was just on the other element of the amendment that was proposed and now been accepted, which is around the ask to bring the big five retail energy companies into public ownership. And the reason that I'm not going to rehash all the arguments we've just had about why privatisation is so damaging, because we've just had that debate. But I wanted to just make one point, a couple of points on this really. The reason why I think it is so important to be talking about public ownership of the energy retail companies is because it's easy to look at the energy production companies, the fossil fuel giants who've been raking in billions of profits, record profits in fact from this crisis. But when we look at the day-to-day impact of this crisis on people, it is the retail companies that are putting people on prepayment meters. It is the retail companies that have siphoned off billions to their shareholders as well. And it's the retail companies that have held back home insulation, which is a major policy need to address the cost of living crisis. So I do think it's important that we do talk about ending the privatisation of the retail sector. And the TUC has estimated that taking the big five energy retail companies into public ownership would cost £2.85 billion. Now, the government spent £2.7 billion bailing out failed private companies in the energy sector over the last 18 months. So I'm extremely grateful that Labour Group have accepted this amendment. Firstly, to applaud the workers and the trade unions that are standing up to take strike action, but also to support bringing the big five energy retail companies into public ownership. And I look forward to that featuring in the next Labour Party manifesto as well, and I hope you all do too.
Thank you. You just beat 3 minutes. So, Edward.
Thank you. Thank you, Shyster, for putting forward this motion, and it's gladly received as well, the amendment from Chris Jarvis and the Greens. The cost of living crisis is really hitting key workers especially hard, including nurses, teachers, utilities workers and rail workers. These and more, and the Fire Brigade Union as well. These and more are defending their rights and conditions and a right to a fair wage. And that is why backing our trade unions is so important, and why it's important it's in this amendment as well. People may have been aware that on the 22nd of this month, last week Sunday, there was a huge rally in the town hall where nurses, lecturers, rail workers, postal workers who've been on strike locally were represented at the event, as well as Fire Brigade Union members with their General Secretary, Matt Rack, who was an incredibly inspiring speaker. We should be proud as a council that we had that event in the town hall that was attended by hundreds of people. We should also be proud that we were able to have that event at a reduced rate which saved valuable resources for local trade unions and the Oxford and District Trade Union Council, who organised the event. Several of us in the chamber today were at the rally, and I'm sure they will agree that then and now it is essential that we back our local workers fighting for fair rights and pay. And the event showed the great energy in the trade union movement here in Oxford, and how it is so important that we back our workers who are struggling to support families and keep warm this winter. The motion rightly blames the Tory government of tax dodgers and millionaires for this cost of living crisis. And we as a city council must make sure that we do what is in our power locally to mitigate the impact of the crisis through our support for advice centres and local charities, and making sure schemes such as landlord licensing are successful and succeed in improving the conditions for private renters. The amendment rightly calls for the country to back the TUC calls to bring in the supply of energy into public ownership, as Chris has just said, so that we as a country can prioritise above private profits the expansion of clean, green and safe energy, and also support the most vulnerable who struggle to pay for their energy bills, who are often paying over the odds for their energy on the basis of, for example, being on prepaid meters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hosnia.
Thank you for bringing this motion. So I'm just going to tell you a couple of short stories, one from home and one from the strikes that I've been on recently with our nurses. I went to get some milk after a day at work at the co-op not far from where Francis O'Grady grew up. And before I realised what was happening, the cashier was basically trying to get a bottle of washing up liquid from someone who had just stolen it or was trying to steal it from the shop floor. Like, imagine being in that situation, that you are having to try and steal a bottle of washing up liquid. And from the strikes, I know that this week, as we've already mentioned, there's going to be even more about workers joining the strikes. There's going to be junior doctors soon, firefighters, teachers are going on strike. More than 34,000 nurses have left the NHS in the last 12 months. And when I was on the strikes, and I do encourage all of you to try and join the picket lines where you are, because it does show the solidarity that we have with the workers who are doing all they can, and they are striking because they have no other option. A brilliant couple that I worked with from Tamil Nadu who were there at the strikes with their young child were talking about the anxiety that they felt day to day, month to month, about just making ends meet. And they had travelled across the world to come and work in our NHS, and yet they were really struggling. And they're striking because they think that there should be fair pay for nursing, and that we need safe staffing, but that involves giving your nurses enough pay that they can live week to week. The anxiety and the worry that so many are suffering day to day, it really takes its toll on your mental health. And it's no surprise that we do have a crisis of mental health illness in this country. So Britain is summarised apparently by the FT as a poor society with some very rich people. Or actually, Nasreen Malek, the brilliant writer from The Guardian who wrote this particular sentence in her last article, said that Britain is a poor society with some very rich people because it is run in the interests of very rich people. So they said there's not billions to pay striking workers. There could be billions of tax raised by closing tax loopholes, but then who would the Tories have left? Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Mike, your turn.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. And I think, to be honest, it was a very friendly amendment. The Private Eye wants economic arguments. So one argument, one simple economic argument, of course, is the trade union wage premium, which in this country currently stands at 4.8%. And I'm proud that that all workers in our council, insofar as we can manage it, our contractors are on a living wage which is negotiated every year with the appropriate trade unions by agreement. But it's not just that. All the rights we have at work and many of the rights that we have as members of society decent health and safety, paid leave, respect for maternity and paternity, and increasingly environmental rights are the product of the trade unions. The trade unions, as Chris mentioned earlier on, are now leading the fight for a just and sustainable transition to a zero carbon economy. The trade union, the labour movement in this country is the engine of progress and the guarantor of our civilization. I am extremely proud to stand alongside colleagues like Edward, like Hosnia, and other colleagues when they go on strike. Even the most intelligent of our opponents can see this. Here's a quote that sprang into my mind, and I wanted to make sure if it was really him, but I checked it and it was. We take our stand by this pillar of our British society, of the right of workers to adjust their wages and conditions by collective bargaining, including the right to strike. That was Winston Churchill. Of course, these days there are no intelligent Tories, and I don't expect Rishi Sunak to ever to say anything like that. But I think as the government's attempts to attack and discredit the trade unions become ever more and more unpopular, according to the polling, I think it will quickly become clear that it is all of the people of this country, all of the decent people of this country who are the vast majority against the government. And the great organising force of the decent people of this country is the labour movement. And so I am absolutely proud to stand with my fellow trade unionists.
I think this is going to be the last motion we're going to be able to discuss, and we'll have to, I think, suspend standing orders for 5 minutes or something to finish. But we've now got Jemima, then Chris Smoten, and then Nigel Chapman, who've put their hands up, and then I hope we can proceed to a vote. So, Jemima.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I just also wanted to thank the Council for this motion and just really to bring us back to Europe. I think, having just listened to the extraordinary words from the Ukrainian mayor, it's worth remembering that today, the 31st of January, is 3 years since we left the European Union, and actually what a huge blow that has been for us as a country in so many ways, including economically. We know that food costs have risen by 6%. It's a huge part of the cost of living crisis, that British households have paid something 5 billion or more pounds extra on food costs in the last, since 2016. I think that the EU withdrawal, our withdrawal from the EU really has had a huge impact on the poorer families. And I think these two statistics, in terms of looking at us, as Tiago's done as well this evening, in the context of our European neighbours, really brings to light what has happened to this country. The fact that the poorest Irish now have a standard of living 63% higher than the poorest of our nation. That the poorest households in the UK have a standard of living 20% below their equivalent in Slovenia. I think this is something that really, we also need to focus on going forward, and it's been great this week to hear so many fantastic reports coming out of the Labour Party on forthcoming meetings with our European allies.
Thank you very much. Chris Smoten now.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Thank you to Councillor Aziz for bringing this motion. The Conservative government has presided over a decade's erosion of people's financial security, which has now matured into an utterly preventable catastrophe. However, this motion does have a few flaws which I think ought to get picked up. Firstly, it is a bit rich that the motion deviates momentarily into having the council clap itself on the back for supporting its advice centres when we are just coming to the anniversary of a budget debate in which the administration vigorously defended reducing their funding. It also calls for several up-ratings that were announced a couple of months ago, so it perhaps could have used an update when it was dusted off for submission to this council. It also isn't at all clear that Labour members were right to hastily adopt a call for nationalisation here. Nationalisation is a means to an end, not a goal in itself, and it is unclear what the benefit would be that would not be achieved by effective regulation and windfall taxes as they themselves originally suggested. I note that this is the second time in as many councils that a Labour motion on a point of principle has snowballed into a £100 billion nationalisation bid that goes well beyond the National Labour Party's position. One has to wonder, are we facing a Labour group or a momentum group in front of us? Nonetheless, these issues are dwarfed in significance by the brutal impact of financial insecurity that keeps people constantly at the cliff edge. There is no greater barrier to improving one's situation than insecurity, both due to direct inability to take financial risk and because of the devastating psychological impact of prolonged financial stress. For that reason, these flaws aside, I would encourage everybody please to support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure procedurally we probably have to suspend standing orders just for 5 minutes to allow us to finish. I'm going to let Nigel speak, then invite Shyster to conclude, sum up, and then we can proceed to a vote. So Nigel.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. I spent quite a lot of my working life dealing with poverty around the world in some of the world's poorest countries. And when I come back to this country now, I'm ashamed, frankly, of the state of affairs that we now face. It's really hurtful, and it makes me really angry. We have a very civilized tone in our debate about things, but about poverty, I don't think we should be civilized. I think we should be bloody angry about what's going on in this country at the moment. And from what I've seen around the world, I'd say 3 things about poverty. Poverty corrodes absolutely. The psychological impact of it, as Hosnia said earlier on, is profound. People lose hope. They're ground down by it. They lose hope, and they lose hope and faith in any sort of institutions that will come and support them out of it. The second thing I'd say that for the elderly and poverty, when they go together, is particularly upsetting to see. I mean, sometimes on the doorstep, I see people who are frightened to put the gas fire on because of the cost of living crisis. What has it come to in this country when elderly, poor people living on a pension just do not have the confidence to turn the fire on at night? They also lose confidence. It strips away their self-respect. They feel helpless. And many of these people have contributed an awful lot to our society over many decades, and they deserve better. And the third thing I'd say is the impact on children. I've seen poverty and children go hand in hand in many countries working for Plan International. They never catch up. That's what you've got to remember about this. They never catch up. So for all those reasons, whilst there's a lot of, good intellectual thinking in this motion, which we would all support, we need to be bloody angry about the state of affairs in this country. We need to be bloody angry and want to change it, because it's intolerable and it's wrong, it's morally wrong, and we need to gird our loins together and go out united to do something about it and to get this bloody government out. Thank you.
Shyster.
So I'd like to thank everybody here for their contributions this evening to this discussion. Like Councillor Chapman, I've spent most of my adult life working in international aid. I've been fortunate enough to travel around the world and meet people from all walks of life, trying to survive lots of horrific things. Poverty is political, be it on our doorstep here in Oxford or somewhere what they usually call remote, which is not remote. I recently, a couple of months ago, I was in a supermarket in the centre of Oxford, and I was horrified to find poultry, dairy products, nappies, all with massive security tags. They were covered in security tags. I've not seen that before in this city, and this is becoming the norm everywhere. This motion outlines very clearly the impact of the Tory cost of living crisis on everyday people, and also the vilification of the trade union movement as well, and working class people and workers. I'm pleased that everybody here is happy to support this, and I do want to also go on record to thank the officers of this council for all their work that they are doing to try and assist people in this crisis. They are working They are working as hard as they can. And as I said, we know from our own emails that we are receiving and phone calls as councillors, our casework is increasing. I think it's really important that we held this debate in a very compassionate and respectful manner. I would also like to thank Councillor Jemima Hunt for bringing the specific points that you have about the wider failure of this Tory government in terms of what it's done to this country. It's absolutely devastating. And thank you for supporting this motion, and I hope indeed we get a unanimous vote to support it. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's proceed to a vote. Those in favour? Against? Abstention? I think this is the first time every motion has been unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. And you've next got the joys of the budget meeting to look forward to. So come girding up your loins for a lot of discussion of the budget.